notion of the talent war. I think what we may be seeing is less about a talent war and more about an emergent talent economy. I don't think this is one of those things that the headlines may go away to some extent. The heat around who's going where today among these large, very attractive, very exciting companies. But what's happening underneath the surface, I think, is more secular. I think you can go all the way back if you're interested in economic history, and you go back to the beginning, the agrarian age, which gave way to an industrial revolution, which gave way to an information age, arguably a meta-information age. I think one could argue we're at the early stages of the talent age, the talent economy, where it's not just about the information you know or have access to, or the knowledge you know or have access to. It's about the people you know who possess that information and knowledge, because the rate with which our understanding of the world around us is accelerating so quickly. It's not just about having direct access to that information at any point in time. It's about having access to the right people. And in our industry, I think that's heightened. So I think you're starting to see something that's going to become far more pervasive on a global basis. And it's interesting, John, I'm looking at the map ahead of us, and I'm thinking to myself, while I'm sure it makes for a fun kind of parlor game to figure out who goes where and how big those territories are going to be, from LinkedIn's perspective, we want to be a company that helps power the economies of each of those countries, if you will, and the global economy that will emerge from those companies.
Interesting. Now, does this lead to everybody has Ari Emanuel as their agent, is what I'm curious. Because he was saying the same thing at dinner. He said, it's all about the talent. Of course, his definition of talent is very different than perhaps yours or others.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, before we go to questions, and if you please come to the mics for questions for Jeff. I've always enjoyed in our private conversations your opinions on other companies. And I'm going to start with a softball because you're a few years out of Yahoo. And you were so integral in when I was covering the search business pretty closely for the book, in getting search really integrated in and getting those teams working at Yahoo. You got a very senior position there, then you left it and ended up at LinkedIn. Do you believe that game is basically over, and that sort of Yahoo said, well, it's either Microsoft or it's Google, and it's done?
I don't know that it's over, and I don't think it's over because of some of the dynamics we talked about earlier. I think if you look at the three waves of the evolution of the consumer web, it largely has been about the companies that created the most value, the most disruption sustainably, were companies that created the most relevancy. Starting with Yahoo, interestingly enough, as a directory, and the mechanism for relevancy was the surfer. And that did the scale as we started to see more and more content on the web. That opened the door for Google. And the mechanism for relevancy for Google has been machine learning and the algorithm, which massively scaled. But one of the things, and Google is very heavily investing in this, one of the things that Google can certainly, in all the major search engines today, can improve upon is subjective-based queries. Not fact-based, objective queries, but subjective-based queries for which the answer is very specific to me and maybe better informed by who I am and my social, my professional graph, etc. And so I believe Yahoo has a lot of very interesting building blocks to make that possible. And the outsourcing of search from a principal position may make sense for them. But I think it's as important to say what you aren't as it is to say what you are. And when transitioning out of that business from a principal perspective, Yahoo still has this incredible opportunity to revolutionize the browse-based experience or the consumption of digital media, which I don't think is going to be exclusive to either a search operating system for machine learning or a social operating system and leveraging a graph, or a system that relies heavily on curation and editorial, which I think Yahoo is amazing at. You can see it in those verticals in their leadership position, things like news, finance, and sports. I think the digital media company in the future, and you obviously spent a lot of time thinking about this, will integrate those competencies in a way that maximizes the value of the browsing and digital media experience. And I think the company that's going to do that and lead the way has yet to fully emerge and assert itself.
I certainly agree with you there. Now, before we get to these questions, and thank you for coming up, I have to ask you this one. One of the themes that ran through the whole conference was financing. And as I understand it, you're in the hundreds of millions of dollars. You are always mentioned in the same breath as a number of other companies that are, quote, poised to go public. You were brought in by Reed and the board, and it struck me you wouldn't have done that had you not seen a IPO on the horizon. How, you know, are you preparing for that?
It's interesting when you said it struck you that I wouldn't have come in unless I saw an IPO on the horizon, and I think this will answer the question as well. I wasn't thinking about whether or not there was an IPO on the horizon. I was thinking about the potential of the company. I mentioned earlier about 85 million professionals, and our mission is to connect the world's professionals, make them more productive, successful. And by some measures, there's as many as 500 million professionals in the world. It's a big, big opportunity. And I think that number is going to grow as developing economies grow. You know, Brazil is one of our largest countries in the world now. And for us, that's the end game. Whether or not we were to go public or raise money in a private transaction of some nature, those are tactics that will ultimately enable us to fully realize the potential of the company. And you know, you had Yuri up yesterday, and I think companies like DST, other private equity companies, have certainly changed the game. They've created other options for companies. So you don't necessarily need to go public as one stepping stone on the way to realize a much larger ambition. So we'll see.
We'll see. You're talking to Yuri backstage. Is there a deal?
You were talking to Yuri backstage?
No.
I didn't see Yuri here.
Okay. Let's get to the questions. Hey.
So to answer your question, as of today, Facebook's market cap, according to Sharepost, is $40.8 billion, Zing is $5.4 billion, Twitter 3.3, next to Yuri up 8% from yesterday, and LinkedIn is $2 billion.
So. $2 billion. There you go. Love that crowdsourced audience. Thank you, Chris. Go ahead. Yeah, and then we'll go over here.
So I would say a lot of competition in this space for the national network. Does that mean, for instance, in Facebook, you have MySpace, Alpha, then LinkedIn, there are not many competitors. It's just more major action. Why is that? Does that mean that there's no competition? Or do you think there's no competition?
Yeah, I think critical mass matters in this business. And I think based on the vision of Reed and the founders, you know, LinkedIn has been around for 7 years now. And I think over time, within our context, our area of focus, the professional, I think 85 million members, a new member every second, I think we have begun to establish critical mass, certainly on a global basis. And I think in that regard, size matters. So I think if you were trying to build a global professional network today from scratch, it's going to be challenging. That doesn't mean there isn't competition out there. I think, broadly speaking, you have other social ecosystems that could be fertile ground for a new company, a company no one has heard of yet, that doesn't exist, to come in and do something different. I would certainly hope that the focus we have on innovation, on research and development, would make that less likely. It will be the ones to innovate on top of this professional graph. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how things play out in the enterprise. Increasingly, a lot of talk, a lot of focus about how to make the enterprise more social. We come at that from a very different perspective. We put our individual professional members first, and we're essentially a consumer web company. That's our DNA. It's creating the best possible user experience for the individual, as opposed to the best product to sell to a decision maker within the enterprise. But that will also, I think, lead to some interesting competitive dynamics. And of course, I mentioned earlier, our largest and fastest growing business is hiring, and the realm of hiring solutions. And there are certainly a number of companies doing interesting things there.
Thank you. Over here.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you guys for having this discussion. I've learned more in and out with you guys than I have in a long time. So thank you.
Well, thank you for coming.
Let me ask you a question on the last part, and that really was, so you see a lot of people hiring from LinkedIn versus like Monster.com, and if so, which ones? What do you feel is the key to that success in there that people more likely to get hired at LinkedIn than they are at Monster.com?
Yeah. So what's interesting about the position that we're in right now is we're able to do some things that haven't been possible before. LinkedIn didn't invent networking, professional networking. What LinkedIn did is it manifested professional networking online. And just was the case with Google. Larry and Sergey didn't invent the dynamic where we all try to find the things we're looking for. They manifested it online. And when you manifest behavior, offline behavior online, a couple of things start to happen. You start to massively scale that process, and you make it more effective. You make it faster, more efficient. And as a result, we can do some things within the realm of recruiting that never been possible. So for example, when recruiters will typically post a job, they'll be inundated by what's referred to as active candidates, people who are actively seeking a job will submit their resume. And for attractive positions, recruiters will be sifting through literally thousands of resumes, especially when times get tough macroeconomically. And that's not where a recruiter's time is best spent. A recruiter's time is best spent when they identify the perfect person for the role. And so the question is, how do they find the perfect person? And what's happening on LinkedIn is people are updating their profiles when they're not looking for work, because it makes them more successful in the jobs they're already in. And as a result, we're building out arguably the most valuable asset for recruiters as it pertains to being able to search for passive candidates. And that's very transformational for the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Quickly, because we're running out of time. So.
About a year ago, you guys opened a European office in the Netherlands. Can you share anything about that? What you've heard from the Dutch users?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I'm smiling just because we have learned something so specific. So for those that don't know, the Netherlands is our most engaged market in the world. So we actually had a chance to take a trip out to Amsterdam. We opened up subsequently an office, a dedicated office, sales and marketing office, to meet with customers, to do member meetups, to find out what was going on. And it turns out some of the explanations are very obvious. So the Netherlands has a history of being really marketplace oriented as a culture, hotbed for true multinational companies, one of the most internet connected companies or countries rather in the world. But what was most interesting and insightful is the fact that in the Netherlands, the business culture tends to be very flat and meritocratic. So people, mid-level managers, won't hesitate to invite, say, the CEO to connect with them. Whereas in more hierarchical cultures, that would never take place. So those are some of the things that we've learned.
Last question, and then we have to stop.
Thank you for the conversation.
Can you speak into the mic, please, so we can hear?
Hi, thank you for the conversation. I have a question in regard to China. I wasn't sure whether you are feedback country or not, and to the extent you are, you are in similar policies like Google, because the government doesn't want certain people to be associated with, people internationally or sensitive information. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are in China. It's one of our fastest growing countries in the world, along with Brazil. I think developing economies, certainly we tend to see a lot of growth in those markets. And one of the things that's interesting about LinkedIn being focused on creating economic opportunity for people is the fact that we can truly add value in countries like China. And so that's the situation we're in right now, I think, as China becomes an increasingly important player in the global economy, not just obviously the economic growth of China, that there's room to leverage the world's largest global network.
You haven't run afoul of any government bodies?
No, to the contrary. I think people are excited about the prospects for how LinkedIn can stimulate economic opportunities for people. And we see that all over the world.
Well, I'd like to keep going, but unfortunately we've run over time. And please join me in thanking Jeff for coming.